I was really very arrogant, actually, in thinking all my skills translate to the private sector. And guess what? They don't. The pivot point for me was meeting somebody who had a similar background to me and could mentor me into the private sector.
Welcome to the Circuit Magazine, the #1 source of information on protection matters, the industry-leading magazine for all security professionals who want to stay ahead of the game.
Veteran-preneurs and building an EP or investigations business, surely it's the preserve of every former service personnel to start something new. I'm here with John Moss, and today we're going to be talking with Scot Walker about this rather all-encompassing topic. How are you doing, John?
Yeah, I'm very good. I'm very excited for today's interview. It really resonates with me, given that I'm ex-services myself. But looking at it more broadly, I'm thinking that this is going to be of interest to all of our listeners and certainly everyone in the security industry, because even if you're not from a law enforcement or services background, I think we, for the most part, share a very common mentality. And I don't know if that's, because we're so heavily recruited from the services and maybe that mindset is seeped in, or whether it's just something completely unique to the security industry, but I think they're very well aligned.
They are, aren't they? And almost it pushes back on the notion that does come up in some of the podcasts. Oh, you have to unlearn and relearn. You have to flush out all sorts of preconceptions. Now you're in the private sector. Well, actually, there's a lot to be gained from keeping a lot of those skills and regimens and motivations, isn't there?
Yeah, for sure. And just in the same vein, also understanding what holds us back, whether that's what we can construe as pride or discipline, perfectionism, making sure that the things that we've aspired to in terms of standards in our past careers don't now hold us back because we're afraid of failure, for instance.
And that comes up time and time again, because obviously in a military context, failure can mean very, big problems. But in the private sector, there's this idea that you need to continually fail. I mean, to be fair, loads of people will get fired for failing, but if you're a veteran-preneur, then you have to be sort of open to it. But I wonder, is it for everyone? Because people have left the services, they want to, have a new career. Is veteran-preneurship for everyone?
Well, I think that's one of the things that both ourselves and the listeners will get a flavor of by listening to this interview, and we can all come to our own conclusions. I mean, I'm really excited to get stuck into this and to help form up my opinions on that question.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into it. Scot Walker, obviously a great friend, especially in Arizona and especially in the Southwest, and of other people we've had on the podcast, including the corporate security translator, Carlos Francisco. This is going to be an exciting and powerful episode. Let's talk to Scot Walker about veteran-preneurship.
And now, let's meet one of the contributors to the Circuit Magazine.
Veteran-preneurs, setting up a risk management and investigations business with a veteran background. Today, we're really pleased to welcome Scot Walker, CEO and founder, Walker & Associates. John Moss and myself, we're really, really pleased to have you on. How are you doing?
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Phil.
It's great to finally have you on. I know you're really big in the Arizona, Southwest, and US corporate security community. I know you have big friends, including Mr. Carlos Francisco, which we've had on before. But before we look at that, let's look at this topic: veteran-preneurs and risk mitigation businesses. What is the problem you think we need to be aware of that needs to be solved? Why is this an important topic?
That's a great question. My sense of urgency around veterans and veteran entrepreneurs or veteran-preneurs is, at least in the with our U.S. community and our international partners, we have been at war for the last 20 years, and so because of that, we have hired a lot of military folks to go fight that war, whether they were on the front lines or they were in support roles, like myself. They have served honorably for decades now, and they are coming up to a pivot point in their life, in their career, which is, do I stay in and do more than 20 years, or do I leave and go do something else? And while I want them to choose what is best for them first and what will spiritually connect them and keep them happy, I have a sense of urgency as they're transitioning. They're seeing like, okay, I can go out into the private sector where I, by the way, have never worked. Many veterans, their first job right out of school, whether that be college or high school, is the military. And then they've stayed in for 20 plus years. And now they're in their late 30s, early 40s, and they're now finding themselves having to understand and kind of, I hear a lot of veterans say, I'm going to go start back at the bottom again. And while I don't want them to think of it in a hierarchy term, like the bottom, I want to think of them like it's a new challenge, it's a new pivot, it's a new experience. I don't know that the military has really equipped them well with the vocabulary and the culture continuity to be ultimately successful without some level of assistance. And there are great programs that are out there for veterans, and I want them to engage in that. And I want them to reach to their other fellow veteran entrepreneurs or veteranpreneurs that are out there doing these things. So I think people look at companies, and I'll just use a couple of US brands, like Article 15 Clothing and Black Rifle Coffee, both veteran-owned companies. And I think they see that success from JT, Matt Best, so on, and they think, oh, this is really easy. Matt Best went from the Army and started this clothing company, and now he's a big shot at Black Rifle Coffee, and I can do that. I'm going to start a coffee company. I'm going to start a t-shirt company. And there's so much more to learn about business and about the private sector and about the economy. They don't have, they think many think it's I just have this idea. People are going to want to connect with me because I'm a veteran. And I believe in veterans, and especially as entrepreneurs, and I know we'll get into that, I do have a sense of urgency that they need to have a better understanding of the community.
And so you believe in them, and of course you are yourself one, as many are in the EP world. What about your journey, your passion to do this? Obviously, we know why we're talking to you, but if you could give everyone a flavor of why you and where passion come from, I think that'd be great.
I put almost 20 years in the military reserve and over 10 years in federal law enforcement. I reached kind of a pivot point, and I was thinking to myself, what's next? I've done all this time and all these things, but I don't know that I am going to want to continue to do them for another 20 years. What's next? And so I started researching the private sector, and I figured that would be a logical thing for me to go into. And I was really very arrogant, actually, in thinking, all my skills translate to the private sector. And guess what? They don't. But there are some really important ones that we overlook that do, and we can get into that too. But the pivot point for me was meeting somebody who had a similar background to me and could mentor me into the private sector. And I really met him off of a fluke. We went to a conference together, and I engaged with him, and he was kind enough to really provide a lot of guidance to me and help me understand the private sector. He was part of a company that was eventually acquired by a much, much bigger company. And so I got to talk to him about the process of acquisition and M&A and what does that mean? And where do you, he was a security leader, where do you make that pivot point and say, I'm going to stay with the smaller company, or I'm going to go with the bigger company? And how do you approach those decisions? And that was the real pivot point for me to say, okay, I think I want to go into the private sector. And when I had that opportunity, I was fortunate enough to go into Silicon Valley and work in tech. But when I landed in the private sector, I was me personally, I was woefully underprepared for what was being asked of me. And it was really my arrogance of like, oh, I've investigated homicides and drug smuggling and all these crazy terrorist things. And I thought, well, of course, the private sector is going to want somebody who can do that. And you guys might not know this, but the private sector doesn't really care about homicides. So I had to figure out, okay, what do they care about? And fortunately, I was in a company that was flexible enough with me, and I adapted to their culture very well. And so I figured it out. But my sense of urgency around veterans and also our law enforcement partners was, oh boy, there's a lot of those folks coming out of military and law enforcement in the private sector. Are they going to make the same mistakes I did? And making mistakes is not bad. That's good. But I didn't want them to go through the pain of making, you're only allowed a few mistakes in the private sector before you could be castigated away from the community. So I want to help people make the right decisions, or at least understand the roadmap, and reduce that arrogance that I had, which was I know everything about investigations and executive protection because I've been all around the world doing them. And really, it's more about understanding, how do you understand the culture of the community that you're joining?
Scott, it's as a veteran myself and also an entrepreneur, but never have I been somebody who's called myself a veteran-preneur. It obviously interests me, and I wonder if in not making the connection, perhaps I've missed something along the way. And I think the whole thing about being an entrepreneur is to try to spot as many opportunities as possible and leverage them to the best that we can. And we've got the different dynamics here of the US and the UK, and I don't want to get too deeply, and I know because this will be this is a very passionate area for a lot of people, and I know that in the UK we believe certainly that our US brothers and sisters coming out of the military are looked after a lot better, and there's a lot more initiatives set up for them. But just focusing on the commonalities, what as a service leaver, where should we be looking if we have a entrepreneurial vibe and spirit, and we have that belief, and that was one of the things I picked up on. You said you had this arrogance when you come out, but I'm sure that also served as to give you a lot of belief and fueled you on your journey. So what's your, well, let me make it a bit more simple. What's your initial advice to service leavers coming out looking to be an entrepreneur?
Yeah, the entrepreneurs, I think their superpower is kind of what you're hinting at, which is our ability. And I love that we're going to cover this from an international military standpoint, because I think our partners in the UK, Canada, France, they build militaries very similar to the United States, our NATO partners especially. And when you do that, regardless of whether you're an NCO or you're an officer, you're being infused with a sense of adventure, a sense of discipline, a sense of stick-to-itiveness. And those are all like, if you compare them just to regular entrepreneur traits, you already have that as a veteran. And so now you come out and you've got a passion and you've got stick-to-itiveness. What I've been talking with, I sit on a number of boards, and so I don't have I'm not in a wealth category as some of the fellow board members that I sit with, but when I listen to them talk about how they invest in small businesses, how they invest in entrepreneurial activities, they appreciate that veteran stick-to-itiveness, and they appreciate that a veteran's not going to give up when it gets tough. Maybe that's a good and a bad thing. I think you need to know what's the breakover point, and when are you just throwing good money after bad. But veterans have that unique experience of, you have eaten the worst food, you've been in the worst conditions, and what came first was the mission and your comrades. And when you have that infused into you from a very young age, whether you've gone through a military academy, you've come out of college, you've come out of high school, we all go through that indoctrination of boot camp, if you will, right? And regardless of the branch, you all go through something that gives you that little extra something that will put you into that category of, I am here, my mission is X. And when you're in the military, it's very clear, right? And you don't really have to decide what the mission is. You're being told what the mission will be. And so the big transition I want veterans to make, and people who want to be veteranpreneurs, is figure out what the why is, figure out what your mission is, and be passionate about that, and be smart about that, and go out and demonstrate that in your experience. And I think that's what is the real difference between our civilian counterparts or civilian colleagues and a veteran entrepreneur.
One thing that speaks very loudly to me is what you were just saying about the mission, and having that mission-focused clarity is a huge benefit. But I wonder, on the flip side, when we're in the military, when we're in the services, those missions are always given to us. We rarely come up with them ourselves. So is that a problem for people leaving the services to understand, what is their own initiative and how do they find it?
Yeah, I totally agree with you, John. I think that's a great point. And that's where finding a guide, if you will, somebody who can mentor you, and not just one person. It's okay to have multiple mentors and mentorship experiences. I still look for them myself and have several of them going on at any given time. And a good mentor will be your sounding board and will not be afraid to say, that's a bad idea, don't do that. Or I really think that you need to evolve how you think about applying the process to achieve those goals. And as somebody who will be honest with you and will be straightforward with you, because so often, to your point, in the military, instruction comes from on high. It drove me, I was in two branches of the military, and you can't get any different from the Coast Guard to the Air Force. They're completely opposite ends of the spectrum. The Coast Guard is very much kind of entrepreneurial, if you will. They don't have a lot of policies and procedures or checklists on telling you how to do investigations, whereas the Air Force literally has a book and a checklist, and you will follow it. So for me, there was friction there, but it was good because I got to switch my brain around and look at things differently. And I think that's also good for our veterans who are looking at entrepreneurship opportunities. Are you comfortable with your baby, your idea failing? And if you're not comfortable with that, maybe veteran entrepreneurship is not for you right now. It may be you're going to live a long life after the military. So a lot of people don't understand. They think they're going to retire from the military or leave the military and go fishing. And it's just not possible really anymore. So we need people to engage in entrepreneurship.
Because I wasn't in the military, right? And so I maybe can speak for the loads of other people who never were in the military and sort of look at the prevalence of people from the military in security. And one of the problems that I would like to ask you, if it really exists, is the balance between hierarchical and flat structures. Is that a real thing? Because on the one hand, there'll be camaraderie in amongst your peer group. So the military is not hierarchical in that sense. But in the world of entrepreneurship, aside from corporations where maybe people might love it, they feel at home, wonderful, another elongation of grades I can get promoted to. Is that a real obstacle to success?
I think so, because when I landed in the private sector, I thought I could just recreate everything I had done in the government. And the private sector didn't care if I wrote a 30-page report or a 2-page report. They appreciated the 2-page report because it was easier for them to read and they could understand what the issue was, and they didn't care and they were on to the next thing. But I found that a lot of trying to apply a lot of what I had learned in the military about structure, to your point about flats versus, kind of a vertical or hierarchical command structure. I found that at least in tech, and I know there are a lot of different industries that we could address here. In tech, they do try to keep things kind of on a flat trajectory as far as leadership goes. At least they talk about it. Mark Zuckerberg, CEO when I was at Facebook, talked a lot about being flat. Same thing with Jensen Huang, who was the CEO or is the CEO of NVIDIA when I was there. They both talked about it. In application, I didn't really see that trickle down as much. I did see a lot of kind of what I call empire building. And that's where our veteran partners will see like, oh, that looks very much like the military. In fact, when I talk to veterans about transitioning to the private sector, I'll use examples like that. Companies are very much set up like in a command structure. You have somebody in charge of operations, somebody in charge of the money, somebody in charge of leadership, so on and so forth. And so while we all, especially in tech again, say, oh, we have a flat leadership style, flat. As you scale, I have found that that's not always possible. But understand that it has its applications and be comfortable with that change, because depending on the company, especially when I was a consultant, depending on the company that you're working with, some have very small leadership profiles and some have very large leadership profiles, and you need to be able to scale and you need to be comfortable with that change.
Not all of our listenership is ex-military, but I'm sure a great portion of them probably do think of themselves as entrepreneurial, because the way in which the security industry is structured, and a lot of us are working for ourselves. And I think a conversation that we have within the circuit quite often is this idea of a brand. And if you are a company of one, then actually your personal brand is going to matter a lot, and you got to be very protective of that. So I think we can all relate to the kind of mentality and ethos of being an entrepreneur. But I'm wondering, what can non-military people learn from military leavers, from the experiences that they've had? And does that then create an opportunity for service leavers to provide that skill set as a consultancy, as a service? Are there opportunities within that?
I think so. The world has changed more, and it's not ridiculous, even though I'm going to say it. The world has changed a lot in the last couple of years, right? But the world is going to continue to change. I speak a lot about our various generations that are in the private sector, that are in our community, our security, investigations, executive protection community. And if I find that we have overvalued, even though, John, you and I are veterans, I do find that there is room for folks who are not veterans, and I want their perspective, because what it's coming down to is, how are we as a community continuing to evolve to meet the risk, continuing to evolve to meet the customer's needs? And even if you're in-house in an in-house role, if you will, you still have customers. The CEO is your customer, the employees are your customers, so on. So it doesn't really, in my estimation, and forgive me if I get this a little wrong, but my understanding is that you in the UK will use the "what color was your beret" statement. It really depends on what color beret you had, right? And depending on what level of trust do you have within the within a community. And we have that a bit here. If you're coming out of law enforcement, if you came out of the FBI or the Secret Service, you have more cachet with that brand. So brands exist, but even though I've said that, I still think we need to get away from building walls because of those brands. I appreciate that somebody did, served our community, whether it be in law enforcement or the military. And I do think that there needs to be a level of acknowledgement there for that sacrifice. But in our community today, if we are not wanting the input from our friends and partners and colleagues that don't have that quote unquote military experience, the right beret color or the right law enforcement experience, we're shunning a whole part of our community, and continuing to build walls is not how we're going to be successful in the future. What I've always said is our communities are not getting safer. Around the globe, we've seen conflict kind of like we've never seen it before. And now we have a war on a massive scale that is going to cost the country of Ukraine billions, if not trillions of dollars, as well as NATO, as well as the UN. And so we are seeing escalation tensions like we may never have seen in quite some time. I won't say ever, but we've not seen in a long, long time. Things are not getting safer. Things are getting worse. So stop saying, or I shouldn't say that. I'll say we need to be more inclusive, less exclusive. And with that said, we absolutely can learn from our military leaders, and they have something to impart, but without arrogance of, I know better because I wore an X color beret. That shouldn't matter as much. It should be about who you are, what your experiences are, and how you're delivering that experience and helping our society, our community be better. We need to be better. We need to be more inclusive, not exclusive.
So Scott, on a practical level, then, if the world is indeed, as we fear, getting more unpredictable, and to both your and John's point, there's a lot that we can learn from former service personnel. If I was trying to set up a business, sometimes people say, "Oh, I'll just open a business. What are you going to do?" And I don't know. I'll just do a business. It's obviously not a good place to start. What are the gaps that you think they could fill? Because you have filled risk mitigation and investigations. Is that going to be a no-brainer in this climate, or on a practical level, what should a service personnel leader think of, founding next?
Yeah, I think anybody who's, we're all in danger of being automated out of a job, or having artificial intelligence come in and do what we do. The good thing is, whether it be close protection, investigations, risk analysis, intelligence, analytics, we should be engaging and using robotics, artificial intelligence, machine learning technology, and everything that we do. Thing one, that's a whole nother podcast. But
hey, we did it. We tried it. I won't tell you what the fan mail said.
Well, and the reality is, we need to be embracing technology, right? That's a no-brainer. But I do think we're in an industry that is going to be even more needed in at least in the private sector. I think in the public sector as well, but maybe even more so in the private sector, because the public sector is not meeting the needs of the safety of these communities. So I think investigations specifically, we are, at least over the next 5 to 10 years, I could see a world in which you don't need to necessarily be sitting in a X location to do X investigations in that X location. I see much more adaptive online, what we used to call desk investigations, where you can conduct investigations around the world because we have technology. And if you're applying that technology in the right way, you can do a lot. Not everything, but you can do a lot. Similarly with our executive protection partners, the more the rich or people of wealth of means are traveling, we've seen that, and you all know better than I do, kind of around the world, that has been happening, where folks are traveling, they are targeted because of their wealth. So same thing with our corporate security partners. If a corporation wants to do business in X country, in X environment, in X with trading partners, you need to have somebody who understands the international relations, supply chain, physical security requirements, governmental requirements, whether it be GDPR or some similar ethics and compliance requirement in a country of your choice. You need to understand that these programs have to be kind of cobbled together and created by a human. We haven't been able to figure out automation on a lot of these things yet. Certainly not on close protection.
So Scott, I'm thinking this is tremendously valuable for our audience because, well, all right, on the one hand, if there was a true entrepreneur out there, they're already doing their Uber for cats, they're doing it, right? They don't particularly need this episode apart from reinforcing their own spirit. And that's great. But would a safe pair of hands, quote unquote, be to say, I was in the military police, I will now turn that directly to the private sector. I was a dog handler. Now I'm going to be a private dog handler. I was a sort of an interrogation specialist. Now I'm going to do due diligence. Is that a safe start, or should they really start to think out of the box as to what they can serve up on a platter for business?
I always want them to think outside of the box. But to your point, sometimes going into something that is more comfortable for you is a good way to start, right? When we talk about entrepreneurship, people will say, well, just start, go out and do it. Well, what do you do? Who do you do it for? How do you do it? What does it cost? What do you charge? What kind of licensing do I need? Do I need insurance? All of those questions are things that you need to answer before you can kind of quote unquote just start. I think it's very easy for some of those entrepreneur advisory people to say that because they don't do things in the world that we're doing them in, which actually require a lot of licensing, liability, insurance, so on and so forth, right? So with that said, I like your approach of, if you are comfortable doing that thing, translating that into the private sector is a good way to start, but don't stop there. Take that, get that foothold, and then look at other opportunities. You should always be learning. You should always be looking for what's next. And like I was talking about earlier, my sense of urgency around people who've done 20 years in the military, maybe they have a pension and they want to come out and they maybe think they can go back to fishing and driving around in their RV. I want you to do that if that's what you want to do. But realize that we need you in the economy. So if you were a dog handler in the military and you come out and you want to go work for there are several working dog companies out there, and you want to work bomb dogs at stadiums or whatever, I want you in that community. But I also want you to be thinking about what's next when this ride ends in X amount of time, months, years, whatever, decades, hopefully, if you find a good company to be part of. What's next? What else do I need to do to educate myself to be ready to take the next step? For example, we'll stay on the working dog angle. If you were working bomb dogs in the military and you come out and you work for a company working at stadiums working bomb dogs, should you, if you have a veteran-preneur spirit, should you be educating yourself about, well, if I wanted to start my own training business, training bomb dogs, what do I need? You don't have to do it right then and there, drop everything, quit the job and go out and do it. But go experiment, go test and learn. Go figure out and run the calculations on everything that you would need to start your business. Licensing, insurance, workspace, what does all that cost? Everything costs money. And this is what a lot of people in the military don't realize, is that everything costs money and nobody does anything for free. How are you going to engage your potential clients? Where are you going to source your dogs? So on and so forth. So learning about how to be an entrepreneur while you're working for somebody is a good way to do it. And that's my advice for folks is come out, pivot, do something that you're comfortable with, but continue to teach yourself and learn and experience. And if you take anything away from our talk today, it's okay to fail. It's okay. You're going to go out, maybe you're going to put $10,000, $20,000 into a business and it's going to fail. I'm telling you, that's okay, because you tried and you didn't know everything, but you learned something from that failure. And just like in the military, if you don't try, you're not going to learn. Wayne Gretzky said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And we need people to come into this economy and give everything that they can get and really try, because we've seen pretty enormous success. And the person who was a dog handler in the military is going to come out and maybe they're the next CEO of a great company. But they're not going to know that unless they try, unless they experiment. And I want them to have that. That's the biggest part of the entrepreneurial spirit, ability to fail, get back up and try again. Right.
Yeah, I love that advice as well, Scott, and it resonates with me, the whole idea of it being okay to fail, because I remember there was a point in my own journey where that was something that I needed to overcome. And I got a great piece of advice, and I don't even recall where I got it from, so I can't give any credit to either the person or the resource. But essentially, it was try to fail as many times as possible. And it sounded so counterintuitive, and I couldn't understand it at first. And what I realized was I was trying to perfect everything, and we all know where that leads. It means you're never going to produce anything, or you've got one shot at producing your life's work, and if it's not right, then you've wasted a lifetime in getting there. So having an approach of being okay to fail, and actually saying, I'm going to try to fail. I'm going to try to fail lots of times. Because what I realized was, especially as an ex-service personnel, it's very hard to fail. We think it's our biggest fear, but actually, we have so many safety mechanisms inbuilt into us. We don't even know when we're doing them. We'll never sit in a restaurant with our back to the door. We don't even know that we're doing it, right? And so actually trying to create something and being okay for it to fail just gives us the freedom and the flexibility to actually get to that completion point. And that was something that I was never getting to. So that is a great takeaway for this podcast.
Yeah, we call it minimum viable product, right? MVP. And I love that you're bringing this up, John, because I was thinking as you were talking, so many people who spent time in the military, they don't appreciate, and I didn't either, how you got to where, or how your organization, your job, your unit got to where it was today or when you joined it. And everything that was laid out in front of you, all the training, all the equipment, all the paperwork, minutia of your job had been trailblazed by people decades, if not hundreds of years before you. The case of our friends in the UK, you all joined regiments that are 1,000 years old or something, right? So that part of the culture, you don't have an appreciation for, okay, now you're out on your own. You got to develop that culture. And I'll share a story from real quickly from my experience when I came out and started my own private investigations and consulting business. I was talking with attorneys, and I would tell them, okay, I'll do this work for you. But I knew from my private sector experience, do you want a written report, or can I just send you an email and we can have a conversation about my findings? And 99% of the time, the client was asking for, just give me a call or send me a short email. Don't send me a report. because they knew, and I know, that when you write a report, that takes time, and I charge you money for that report, for my time on the keyboard writing a report. But in the government or in the military, a report, hey, if you didn't write it down, it didn't happen. And while you should have some notes and you should have things in the private sector, you should write things down. That's important. I don't want to dismiss that. But the amount of hours and days and weeks we spend documenting a report, is that really going to be useful in the private sector? That was my experience, is that most of my attorney partners, attorney clients, didn't want that because they understood it was an additional expense. Now, I still take notes and I document everything in email and so on and so forth, but that was a change for me for my time in the government. My MVP was, I'm going to shoot you an email with a brief summary of what I did and what I found and what to do next, or my recommendations, or whatever it is. A big report costs more money. Now, there are clients out there that want that. I don't want to be dismissive, but for me, the understanding what my MVP was short, concise, and to the point.
Fantastic.
I think it's also a reflection of understanding the client and the changing needs of the client. We all live in a consumer culture where we are constantly having data fired at us every which way we look, and our attention spans naturally suffer, and we just want the salient points in the shortest time possible. And so I think, beyond that, that's also really good recognition of the client needs, which is all part of the formula for success.
So, Scott, what's next for you? I know you, of course, have many friends in the industry, so perhaps it's collaborative. What's coming up for you?
Well, we're definitely going to be talking for ASIS International GSX this year. We're going to be continuing conversations. I'm trying to explore online content threats, risk. A lot of people call it the metaverse. The Internet 3.0, if you will, as that's evolving, I'm having lots of conversations with folks. I've been on very similar podcasts. We're going to be talking about this at GSX, about how are we as a community of security investigations, executive protection, evolving our understanding of that community. How does blockchain fit in? How does cryptocurrency fit in? What does that mean for us in our industry? And I want to continue having those conversations. I'm going to be, I have my own podcast, if you will. It's really something I post on LinkedIn and YouTube, but it's called Protective Future, What's on the Horizon. Upcoming later this week, I'm going to have Sandra Stibbards from Camelot Investigations on. We're going to talk about the online community of dating and what kind of threats and risks come out of that. So I continue to drive let's talk about threats and risk in the evolving landscape. And so that's what I've got coming up. Thanks for asking.
Fantastic. Well, I love that. And I really am pleased that we've sort of opened up the veteranpreneur question. Maybe there are people who are now thinking, I am a veteranpreneur, actually. And maybe that's a positive blend of attributes. So I think we absolutely need to support the community in as many ways as possible. This is a very key aspect to look at for the podcast. Right. From John and myself, it's been a pleasure having you on, Scott. This has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast. Well, I've certainly learnt a new term, veteran-preneurship. I like it. I think it speaks to the community in a way that they're going to really appreciate. What did you take away from today, John?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that the interview does is it opens your mind to considering whether you're an entrepreneur or indeed a veteranpreneur. And I think for a lot of us in the security industry, by default, as we spoke about, we kind of are entrepreneurs just because maybe we're a business of one. And if we just think of ourselves as being self-employed, then perhaps we stay on the same trajectory and we're not necessarily going in a specific direction because we might not be setting ourselves goals or realizing ambitions. But one of the things that defines a lot of entrepreneurs out there is that if you ask them, where do you want to be in 5 years' time? They'll have an answer for that. But I know a lot of us in the industry can be guilty of not having an answer to that question.
That's right, because maybe we're fearful that we're lacking this skill or lacking that skill, and that really speaks to a lot of the former service personnel that go on a lot of training courses. I mean, that's really laudable because you're saying, well, do you know what? I have a lot of gaps, so I don't know. Where do I want to be in 5 years? Well, that depends on what skills and teams I can assemble and so on and so forth, and perhaps veteran-preneurship is the logical next step or conclusion of a lot of the episodes we've been having. We had Craig McKim looking at personal branding, business branding, and development. The way you can promote your services and yourself whilst remaining the great professional. We've had another sort of look at marketing back last year. We had people going into different niches. We had Anton looking at celebrities. We had other people looking at international travel.
Mark James is a big proponent of the power of branding and understanding how important that is to you as an individual within the industry, because I think it's very common for us to think of ourselves as an asset, somebody else's asset. Then you competing with other philosophies like the grey man, for instance. And I think that there is definitely a place for the grey man operationally, but then how do you reconcile that when perhaps you're out of work or you're looking to take the next step up on the ladder, and you have to know how to project yourself and promote yourself and be comfortable doing that.
That's key, isn't it? And yet there is a certain special something with having been in the services or been in the forces, and how that adapts, which I think Scott captured very, very well, and leads on very nicely from last year when we had Carlos Francisco talking about the corporate security translator. How do you make a transition? But that is in end effect a piece of the veteran-preneurship puzzle, because he's saying how to work in the private sector. Well, then by extension, how to create a business that lives in the private sector, which I think is a nice combination. And I really enjoy meeting up with Scott. Scott very kindly came again to the Convergence event in Phoenix I ran last year, and hopefully he'll come again this year. But talking about events, we have something that all our listeners should sign up for on the 29th of April. We're going to do another deep dive into a topic that we looked at in 2020, which is about making effective learning and development choices. Surely by now, this is all done and dusted, isn't it, John? There's no controversy in where to find your training, is there?
Well, if only it was that simple, right? And that we could just host one single event and everybody would all be informed and all on the same sheet of music, and we wouldn't have to cover it again. But then I think we'd probably be about to retire then, wouldn't we? That would be job done.
It would be, wouldn't it? Because there's still debate. Like, even if I mention this topic, there'll be a gasp of breath in some quarters. What about online learning? No, it's such a sensitive topic. It can't be done. Well, maybe accounting for EP, accountancy skills, that could be done online. Anyway, I won't spoil it. We've got lots of nice topics. We've got fitness skills. We've got OSINT skills. We've got choosing the right course. And yeah, there will be an element connecting with today's session of, well, what to do if you've just left the services? Where do you put your money? And how do you assess an EP course? So 29th of April, people should definitely sign up to that. I will host the agenda on lectern.live, but of course we will be sending out more communications. Other than that, I'm sure, John, you're appreciating the influx of articles for the magazine.
Yeah, we're in the closing stages. Perhaps still time if anybody wants to get anything to us for the upcoming issue. But if you miss that one, don't worry, send it in. Production doesn't ever really stop here at the circuit. As soon as we're done with one, we're putting together the next one. So yeah, just get it to us, and I'll make an attempt at the email address info@circuit-magazine.com. We look forward to hearing from you.
Wonderful. We will put your name in lights. You, listener, you may be a first-time writer, you may be a long-time writer, but you've got a story to tell. We want to hear from you. Fantastic to see Scot Walker today. It's been a pleasure having him on. We look forward to continuing this debate, not least on the 29th of April for our online event. But from John and myself, this has been another fantastic edition of the Circuit Magazine podcast.
You have been listening to the Circuit Magazine podcast. Be sure to subscribe and be sure to not miss an episode.